Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today it is time for the 2025 UFL Week 4 Power Rankings. Man, this weekend was overall really good one of football. Now, we had one really poor game to watch in the Stallions Renegades, but the other three games were all very enjoyable, and a couple of them were legit high scoring games, something we have not seen this season whatsoever. So that was incredibly cool to see. Close games, even though one of them, the final score may not have been super close, the game was pretty much a close game the whole time. It was a great week of football. Now, as for the power rankings this week, you pretty much all know who number one's going to be, but the rest of it is pretty much in two tiers. You have 2 through 5, which, man, for those four teams, you could easily justify any of them being as high as 2 or as low as 5. And I mean legitimately. You can call one of the teams frauds, you can call one of the teams a record that isn't deserved, you can call one of them a team that is just a bunch of question marks. It's insane. 2 through 5 legitimately can be changed pretty easily depending on how you do your rankings. So I think we're all going to have a bit different there. And even the bottom three, while I personally think it's kind of obvious, I've seen a lot of people already disagree with the ones I have. So even the bottom three you can really put in any order, despite one of them beating another one in the bottom three just because of how they beat them. It's weird. So we're going to do the power rankings, and of course we're going to look at each team's biggest weakness. We did this last year. We are, of course, bringing this back. We're going to look at the biggest overall weakness or specific weakness of each team. So let's get started with the number 8, the San Antonio Brahmas. This might be considered a hot take, but in my honest opinion, I think it's kind of hard to justify putting them above the other 0-3 team in the league. The main reason is that the San Antonio Brahmas have played 3 straight weeks where their defense has been utter garbage. This was the first week their offense looked good, which coincidentally was when A.J. Smith resigned. So yes, and of course Wade Phillips was not on the sideline for a second time this season. Overall, this game was a lot closer than it really should have been. Of course, Perkins had that bad pick six. The Panthers overall didn't necessarily have the greatest day in the red zone. It was a pretty poor outing by them. The Panthers could have easily put up over 30, but a lot of self-inflicted wounds hurt them in that regard, making this a closer game than it really should have been. The ground game for San Antonio continues to be one that just isn't hitting on all cylinders. McFarland, of course, will give you his like 1 or 2 big plays, but aside from that, the running game has still been a relative disappointment for this team compared to what we expected them. And as for them overall, again, their defense is the worst in the league by far. Yes, they're not the worst in the league by yardage standards. Of course, the Roughnecks are a bit worse. But points allowed, they've allowed a ton of points in all 3 games. Over 20 points in each game. That's really bad, especially when you consider the fact that the next worst defense is still probably Houston. Even their defense has looked better and better after week 1's awful game against St. Louis. In a defensive league, having a terrible defense and an offense that, again, has had 1 week where it was okay. It wasn't great, but it was okay. Again, it's great they put up over 10 points, but they still haven't put up over 20 because, again, they scored a touchdown off a pick six, so they haven't put up 20 points in offense. Third down percentage, again, there's 3 teams with 35%, but they're still the worst of those 3 teams at 35.1. So they're bottom of the barrel there. They've gone for a lot of fourth downs, and despite having a lot of, experience in fourth down, they're still only 50% on it. So it's pretty tough to look at this team and be like, yeah, this is a great team. Kellen Mond has not been a great quarterback. He looked better this week. The best way to put it is Anthony Brown, of course, is Anthony Brown. Aside from him, Kellen Mond has been arguably that next worst full-time starter. I say arguable because E.J. Perry is one of those guys who's just really maddening to watch because he'll give you a couple really great drives and then he'll immediately throw, like he did this past weekend, back-to-back back-breaking interceptions. But again, that second worst quarterback that's been starting is starting quarterback is pretty much like a mix of like 3 guys in that, and Mond is one of them. But the fact is, Mond is just kind of average. He's just Kellen Mond. I don't think Brahmas fans will want to admit it, but he's really this team's Danny Etling. He is the quintessential mid quarterback. He can run. He's not an incredible runner, but he can run. He is a passer that isn't going to throw a ton of interceptions, but he's not going to, win you the game, and we saw it this past weekend. So again, I'm putting him at number 8 because I think the team above them is more complete despite the fact they lost to a team that nobody really thought they'd lose to. It's still hard to justify because, again, my whole feeling was these 2 teams, them and the Roughnecks, were the worst 2, and they had to win to prove otherwise. The same goes for the Brahmas. They have to win or end up having another close game and the other team gets beat by a team they shouldn't lose to move up. So for me, I'm keeping him at number 8. Now, their biggest weakness is penalties. Look, we all talk about the Arlington Renegades and how bad they've been a couple games. Only one team has had 10 penalties, and not one, not two, but all 3 games. The Brahmas. Their least penalized game was against St. Louis, and that was when they had 10 penalties. They lead the entire league on penalties by 5 and yardage by almost 60. The penalties have just been killing this team. And it's not even like the teams they're going against are being very disciplined either. Again, 5 penalties is still a lot that you don't want to see. And even the Arlington game, Arlington had a ton of penalties, but so did the Brahmas. When you're having all these penalties, that's 300 yards overall, again, offense or defense, that you are now losing at. That's about 100 yards a game. So if you were to split that in half, again, just to make it simple to understand, that's 50 more yards of offense for you and 50 less yards that the team gains on the opposition. It sucks. This is what's been hurting this team a lot, are these penalties. The fact that a team coached by Wade Phillips, again, I understand he hasn't been on the sideline for 2 of the 3 weeks, but a team coached by Wade Phillips is really concerning that they're this undisciplined, and the fact that they haven't been even getting slightly better is wild. Definitely the biggest weakness for the Brahmas are the penalties. Number 7, the Memphis Showboats. They do move down. You should not lose to the Roughnecks, but at the same token, this is the biggest reason they're above the Brahmas. That point differential. The Roughnecks have won a game over Memphis. And despite that, Memphis has the best point differential of all 3 teams that have a losing record right now. That does say a lot. That's because of what I've been saying for basically the past week and a half, 2 weeks. In terms of being a complete team, they're one of the most complete teams. Now, the issue is what we'll get to in their biggest weakness, but the big problem is that E.J. Perry just throws too many interceptions. I say most complete in a sense that this team can give you multiple great drives on offense. Very few other teams really can. DC, a full drive, we really haven't seen. St. Louis, we did against 2 bad teams. Against a good team in DC, we still saw a couple. Arlington hasn't the past couple weeks. Birmingham basically hasn't at all, aside from their last drive. Memphis can guarantee 2 to 3 really solid drives. The issue is their turnovers. Their giveaways is dead last. 8 giveaways and their turnover differential of -8 because they have no takeaways. That's abysmal. And that's the thing that's craziest about their defense. Their defense is still a solid statistical group in middle of the road in points allowed and yardage, despite having so many turnovers by the offense and having so few takeaways by the defense. Yes, that shows some problems that they can't get interceptions or fumbles, but on the flip side, that shows that they're still putting up solid overall stats despite everything going against you. When you are not turning the ball over, right, that usually means the team has a better opportunity to score, obviously, and they have a chance to gain more yards. If you're not getting a ton of sacks, same story. If your offense is turning the ball over, it means your defense is on the field more. Yet somehow they're still middle of the road, which is why this defense is still one of the best in the league. Again, this loss to Houston, they shouldn't have lost it. But let's go into the biggest issue and why I say that their offense is actually better than people give it credit for. It's because their final drives are what's killing them. That's their weakness. Above everything else, it's not their run game, it's not their passing game, it's not their turnovers. The biggest weakness are the final drives for this team. This isn't Arlington last year's losing on the opposite side and on the other, losing on both sides. Week 1 against the Panthers, they had this brilliant touchdown drive. They ended up getting the ball back, and the immediate first play or second play was a pick 6. That game was a 1-score game that turned into a 2-score game because of the pick 6. Again, final drive, absolutely botched. Then you have week 2 against DC. Again, you have another immaculate, or this time you have your first real immaculate drive. You eat up so much time on the clock, and what ends up happening? Kick a field goal, it gets blocked, and that's essentially game. Because the kick is up, it gets blocked, you were going to kick it, go for the 4th and 12 to then get back into field goal range to win the game, and you couldn't. Yeah, this masterful drive took down so much time on the clock, and it didn't mean anything. Then this past week against Houston, they used almost 10 damn minutes on their final drive. That is immaculate football. All to score a touchdown and fail the 2-point conversion. Missed the guy wide open on the left. You can say it was because of getting pressured. You can say it was, he just had no chance. Bottom line is they didn't get it. So this immaculate drive was essentially for nothing. 3 straight weeks where they had a chance to win on the final drive, and two of them were incredible drives where the very end of it failed. They do one or two plays differently on any of these drives, we could be talking about a team that's 2-1 or hell even 3-0. That's the biggest reason they're above San Antonio. Through 3 weeks, San Antonio has not really had a single game aside from the Michigan one where you can say, oh, one play changed it. But in that Michigan game, it was Michigan making a lot of mistakes compared to this. So, Showboats at 7. Now, coming in at the number 6 spot is going to be Houston Roughnecks. I hate that I have to move this team up 2 spots, but when we're at this point in the season, you kind of have to have a win. The Roughnecks looked a lot better with Nolan Henderson at quarterback, and thankfully CJ said after the postgame that Henderson is the guy going forward. He was almost perfect passing, 10 of 11, had a touchdown. Didn't have the most yards per completion at 80, but was still a very effective passer. Anthony Brown, once again, not very accurate. He did have above 50 percentage, which a certain other quarterback couldn't do today or during this weekend, but still poor quarterbacking. 40 yards on 8 completions is horrific, let alone 15 attempts. Against Memphis had that super long drive, so that huge drive really got into it, but overall Houston did hold onto the ball for a very long time in this game, all things considered. And again, they got 3 takeaways. Yes, they got a pick 6, which really helped them out because, again, you could argue Memphis is better than Houston because that pick 6 is essentially what gave Houston the win. And again, overall, Houston is just a very sketchy team. Their yards per game on defense is dead last. They've allowed far more yards than anyone else. Again, they're one of 2 teams above 300, and even then they're still worse. I mean, when you're worse than the Brahmas in a defensive category stat, that's not good. But again, they've had back-to-back games where they've had relatively low scoring, and this game was a bit higher scoring on the the Showboats offense. But overall, they've been in lower scoring games, especially against Arlington. But I feel like number 6 is Houston. I don't think we have to really talk about it too much. Biggest weakness is the offense in general. Their running game is their quarterbacks. Their 2 quarterbacks, all things considered, are their best 2 running backs so far. Because aside from that, it's just not insane. Again, Zaquandre White has been their main starter, and he's not doing incredible. 3 yards a carry just barely isn't insane. Kirk Merritt hasn't been doing a ton. Again, Lingard has only had a few carries, 10 overall. It just hasn't been great. The passing game, really weak as well. Again, 3 interceptions. They've taken 5 sacks across 2 games. Even with that great stat line, Henderson still is not completing a ton of passes. 53% is not a great stat line. So you have 2 inaccurate passers across 3 games. Again, across 3 games, 2 inaccurate passers. And overall yards per game is dead last 200. Now, Marcus Sims is going to help. He barely did a lot this weekend because, of course, he was active. Again, Cam Carter wasn't even active for the Panthers. So take what Sims did with a grain of salt that it was his first game here in Houston. But he needs to contribute more, obviously, next week because so far this team's offense has not been as good as we were hoping it could be. So, biggest weakness for them is the offense. Now, again, the top 5, well, really 2 to 5 are really difficult to pick, but for me, number 5 is the Renegades. I said in my video where I covered this game in detail, I'd be damned if I moved this team up. I was going to move them down, and I was going to move the other team down, but get to that when I get to it. Number 5 is the Renegades. Back-to-back weeks, this offense has been borderline abysmal. I say borderline because they'll at least get to the red zone, but in this game, it was more so that the Stallions gave it to them with penalties. I talked about it in the live stream because I also did a live play-by-play of this game. When you got to that mid-third quarter, early fourth quarter, it was to a point where no matter what Birmingham did, this would be an Arlington choke. This was the biggest choke of the season so far. This win was handed to Arlington on a silver platter, and they just couldn't get it done. Perez, again, technically a solid game, a turnover-free passing game, but he didn't throw for a touchdown. He didn't have a ton of air yards like he did last season. So again, while part of it is good, overall this is still a somewhat disappointing Perez stat line. Ground game. Ballage had another big run, and aside from that, did virtually nothing on the ground. Day-Day Hunter had a big run. Aside from that, didn't do a ton on the ground. He did more overall. Not really. I mean, again, ground game, still incredibly weak. The passing game, still not what you expected. When you look at the turnover differential, they're at 0. They're one of the 3 weakest teams in the league. Again, a lot of teams are at 1, but they're still technically one of the weakest teams. Third down percentage, they're actually really good. So you'd imagine they'd be scoring a lot of points, but they're really not. Now, defense, they have the best points allowed, but one could argue that, again, pre-A.J. Smith resigning, the 3 worst offenses in the league. Again, at this point, the 3 worst offenses in the league is a pretty tough one to call, right? I mean, it was Houston and San Antonio were the 2 weakest. Now, some would still say San Antonio because it's only been 1 week, but some would say that they're not a bottom 3 unit. DC and Birmingham have been pretty bad. The bottom line is they haven't played a great offense yet, so that is a asterisk, especially when you have 246 yards per game allowed. We all know DC is a better defense than Arlington, though Arlington's is still better than it was last year. It just has the asterisk of who they've played. Again, back-to-back weeks, they've barely put up 10 points. We're getting in legit Houston Roughnecks levels of ineptitude on scoring. That's bad. So it's pretty hard for me to justify putting this team higher, because it's one thing like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. This is back-to-back weeks now where your offense has been pretty poor, and a big reason for that is the biggest weakness, the red zone offense. This team has gotten into the red zone the past 2 weeks 6 times. They've come away with 1 touchdown. This game against Birmingham was horrid. 0 for 4 in the red zone is inexcusable. The fact that that happened is just, it's mind-numbing. Like, really. How do you do that poorly? And you didn't even score every time. You only put up 9 points, so you didn't even score one of the times you went into the red zone. That's really bad. Again, time of possession, you beat the Stallions by a wide margin, but you took a lot of bad sacks in this game. You took a lot of TFLs this game from your ground game not being efficient. You didn't even lose the penalty battle. Yes, I know, Arlington pretty much got hosed. The fumble should have been Arlington's ball. The false start, I get technicalities, but technical blah, blah, blah. They got hosed overall when it comes to the fact that a review basically cost them at the end, as well as a fumble that should have been theirs. Even though that's the case, as I said in the live stream mainly, that doesn't matter when it comes down to you should have won this game. The worst team between them and Birmingham is Arlington, because this game was a free W, and they did everything in their power to lose, and most of that comes down to the red zone offense. You should not be having to kick the ball this much in the red zone. Again, when your long is a 33-yard field goal, you're just kicking a bunch of short field goals. That's not how you win games. Unless you have a defense like DC's, you're not going to win games playing this kind of football. Again, Arlington has a great defense, but it's not good enough to consistently hold their opposing teams to under 10 points. If you have to hold a team to under 10 points, you don't have an offense. So red zone offense, though, specifically is the biggest weakness for this team. You could argue the run game, and I would fully buy it. But the one thing to me is, like, pretty much every team this year has had a really poor ground game. So it's hard to be like, yeah, your biggest weakness is the ground game. But so is everybody else's. So it's not really a weakness if everybody has it. You know what I mean? But number 5, the Renegades, thought this was pretty clear cut. Number 4 is the Stallions. It pains me to put them here. I was so ready to move them down. I said after that video I was going to move both them and the Renegades down. I was fully ready. I was hoping Memphis would pull off the W, because if Memphis had beaten Houston by like 7, 10 points, I would have put Memphis above both these teams. I'm just telling you right now. But Memphis lost. They deserve to move down. Houston is not better than either of these two teams. I'll be damned if I reward Houston for pulling off 1 win above Birmingham or Arlington. But Birmingham, you're lucky you didn't move down in the power rankings, because that was an awful performance. Biggest issue for them. Back-to-back weeks, they've had very sketchy wins. Against the Michigan Panthers, it was less that Birmingham played to win and more so Michigan played to lose. The special teams I did an in-depth review on, the 2nd and 8 that Perkins didn't run for it. It was a rough game by Michigan. And then this game against Arlington, again, they had 1 last drive, and that was it. Again, just like Houston. So unless you want to say that you're the Houston Roughnecks now, which is you had 1 good drive at the end of the game against Arlington like Houston did, but they couldn't score the extra point, you ain't good. Like, Birmingham, I've seen a lot of people say they're the second best team in the league. Their defense is incredible, but my God, their offense is still pitiful. That is now 3 straight weeks where the offense has really not done anything to make me go like, wow, this is a great unit. Matt Corral still can give you a couple big throws, but that's about it. There's a couple other quarterbacks that give you a couple big throws. Overall statistics, they're one of the worst third down percentage team. Again, they're with Memphis and San Antonio in that bottom 3 third down percentage, 35%. Turnover differential, they're the 2nd worst in the league at -2. Now, defensive yards per game or offensive yards per game, they're 2nd worst at 239. Now, points allowed on defense, they're a great unit. They're tied for second in points allowed, and the yards per game is a lot worse at 268. So it's not like they're insane. They're more of a bend don't break defense so far through the past few weeks. But man, it's hard to put this team as a top 3 team when you can't really look at their wins and be like, yeah, they won the game. Like, it was a win. Michigan's against San Antonio, they made it a close game. Michigan's mistakes. Michigan against Memphis, they made it close on that final drive in the last quarter where Memphis put up points. Birmingham got beat by DC. They were able to pull off the win against Michigan and were able to pull off the win against Arlington. Even St. Louis, again, I know a lot of people might want to punish them a lot. St. Louis still just lost to the best team in the league, and the final score does not indicate how close a game it was. So for me, number 4 is the Birmingham Stallions. Biggest weakness is offense as well. Again, the passing game, one of the weakest in the league, third to worst in yards per game. Turnover or touchdown to interception ratio, 3 to 4, not good. Now, overall yards per game, as I said, they're second to worst in the league. Rushing yards per game, they're second to worst in the league. In a league that doesn't have great rushing this season, again, these stats may show like 100 plus, but we all know the rushing game has not been great. It's a lot of volume carries, not good carries. Again, 3.9 yards per average. A lot of that is inflated by your quarterback, mainly Alex Magoo when he was running in week 1 was still very solid. Overall ground game has been disappointing, especially with the Maribel-Person combo, which we expected to be a really solid one. And at least with the, McFarland, Lovett, we've seen flashes. We really haven't with this one. So, biggest weakness is the offense for the Stallions. It's pretty hard to argue anything else. The special teams have been a really solid unit, all things considered, and the defense has been incredible. We all know the weakest part of this team is, and it's the offense. Number 3, the Michigan Panthers. Yes, I know Birmingham just beat them, but let's call it like it is. Okay, that was a very weird win. Birmingham, it's hard to justify Birmingham moving up after what they did this past weekend, whereas Michigan looked better. Michigan played Perkins essentially the whole game. Etling was the starter, had a big solid throw, but then got hurt, was out for the game. Perkins threw an awful pick 6. Aside from that awful pick 6, he played incredible this game. Again, he didn't throw any touchdowns, but he had 2 on the ground. They actually ran him. Now, 10 attempts for 30 carries is not a stat line you would have expected to see him in, like that's good. But trust me, this is what we've been wanting to see since the season started. They have not been doing this. The amount of read option, direct QB runs we saw is what we've been missing from this Panthers offense. With him, it was a great performance. Jaden Sheridan had that one huge 43-yard bomb of a touchdown run, which is incredible. Again, aside from that, ground game still hasn't been great, but again, so is every other team. But when you allow Perkins to do this read option, this, legit design QB draws, it is potentially going to help out the other running backs to have better performances, because now you're actually worried about the quarterback running, which you weren't the past 2 weeks. Incredible. Again, Perkins, still a very accurate passer. Again, 73 completion percentage, well, really basically 74%. And against San Antonio, they had almost 50 yards more of total offense. Again, time possession was not, they did lose that battle. But overall, they were better than San Antonio. Again, the red zone was very sketchy. 2 of 6, you got to the red zone 6 times, that's great. But 2 of 6, that's bad. Yards per game on offense, they're 4th right now. Yards per game on defense, they're also one of the weaker units in the league right now. Or, they're not the weaker, but they're in the middle of the pack right there. Points allowed, but again, in terms of schedule, they've also played a tougher schedule, all things considered, right? Against Memphis, I think they're the best winless team right now. Well, not really a tough schedule, but you know what I mean? It's tough to say because in terms of tough schedules, at this point, really DC has played the toughest schedule, and then Memphis kind of. It's weird. The point is when they played these teams, right? Memphis looked heavily improved. They looked like a solid team heading into week 1 when you consider what they played in week 1. Week 2 against the Stallions, it looked like they were getting their mojo back. They really haven't. San Antonio, a lot of people think San Antonio is going to be a much better team after this game. We'll see. If they are, then this strength of schedule is okay. If not, poor strength of schedule. But like I said, I'll be damned if I'm moving Birmingham up after that performance this week. So, kind of mainly because of that, Michigan stays at moves up to number 3. Biggest weakness is special teams. This is why they lost to Birmingham. Their special teams have been bad, and a big reason why it was close against San Antonio, all things considered. BT Potter is the weakest kicker in the league. even his makes are sketchy. He'll kick it, it'll curve left, and it'll be like 3 yards away from hitting the goalpost. Like, bro, really? Their net average is still awful punting. It's still the worst in the league. Even their kickoff average is one of the weaker in the leagues. It's just a really bad special teams unit. It's not even like there's one part that's good and one that's bad. It's just a bad unit. So it's pretty hard to look at him and be like, yeah, let's call it a great unit. It's not. Biggest weakness of special teams, a better special teams unit, they beat Birmingham, but special teams unit they lost to Birmingham, and the game against San Antonio was closer than it really should have been. So, number 3, the Michigan Panthers. Number 2 is St. Louis Battlehawks. I know some people want to put this team down lower because of how bad this game looked for Manny Wilkins. So let's just get let's talk about it. Manny Wilkins looked awful. 3 interceptions that were bad. 16 to 29 completion percentage of 55 is not good. Did still have solid yardage, but overall really poor game. Against the ground game, Jacob Sailors legit did nothing on the ground. He was non-existent. He was the only running back to this point that had been doing anything, and he was the MVP through 2 weeks. Now the MVP is up in the air legitimately. It's pretty hard to argue who is MVP through 3 weeks now. It was Sailors, but now we don't know. There's really nobody on DC's offense that has even a shrivel of an argument. Maybe Perkins, but again, week 2 wasn't great. So it's kind of up in the air. We'll see. But Manny Wilkins, again, on the ground. He had the big run, and even then he still had overall decent carries. He's been the best player on this team in terms of the ground game this week because, man, the rest of the team on the ground was awful. Now, they're still leading a lot of big categories. Rushing yards per game, overall yards per game, punt return average, and third down percentage. That's the big one. They still lead in all those stats. Now, of course, this is a bad loss. And I'll just get right into it. The biggest weakness is they're on fraud watch. The 2 teams they played before this were the 2 worst teams in the league, right? Houston week 1, before their defense got any sort of shred of what they're doing. And then San Antonio, obviously, before the A.J. Smith resignation, which perhaps may have been a benefit for him. So they had 2 really weak opponents. And Arlington in week 3, their defense still played well, but their offense still played poorly. St. Louis, bad. This was a poor one. Yes, a lot of the reason that DC scored as many points they did was because of turnovers. St. Louis had 4 of them. But DC's offense is still not a good unit, and you made it look at least somewhat competent in the overall box score. Not the full box score, but mainly just, the final score, which is bad. And your offense looked significantly worse. You had that one deep touchdown by Manny Wilkins, and that's pretty much it. You eliminate that touchdown, yikes of a game. Not good. Again, really solid or really poor game. Again, 4 of 14 on third down percentage in this game, right? Again, you had a great stat there, and it definitely went down a lot because of this performance. It's hard to look at this team and say, man, you let DC have 346 yards of offense on you and be like, yeah, you're a legit team. That offense is not good enough to put up that kind of stat and to dominate you by 11 minutes on the time possession, or basically 12 minutes. Yikes. So the biggest weakness for this team isn't a single thing. It's just on overall fraud watch. I don't think they are right now. That's why I put them at 2 and not any lower. But if they come out in week 4 and have another bad performance, don't be shocked if this team drops significantly in the power rankings. Number 1 is the DC Defenders. It hurts to say this because in terms of number 1 teams, it still feels really weird to call them that. But for now, they are. They are a defense. That's this team. They are like the Renegades last year, but the exact opposite. Instead of a really, really great offense and a really, really bad defense, it's an incredible defense and a really poor offense. But the biggest difference is defense wins championships and it wins games. They're the only undefeated team in the league. That's why they're number 1. Their defense is insane. Not only are they still the number 1 team in points allowed, despite not playing those weak teams like a San Antonio for the first 2 weeks or Houston, they've played solid teams, at least at the times of playing them. Again, no Birmingham is, middle of the road team right now, but they've played the toughest schedule, all things considered, right now. And they have the best points allowed, and they have the lowest yards per game allowed, and by a pretty wide margin at like 40. Turnover differential. They're not only the best team in the league, they're the best by a country mile. And that's not because they're not having turnovers. They're turning the ball over. It's just their defense is getting a lot of takeaways. Even without this game, it's still a really solid, positive differential, even without this game. Now, passing yards a game, they are the leader, which is mainly because they just keep throwing the ball. Kicking points, biggest Achilles heel is the fact they have to keep kicking the ball. They're in these games because of their kicking team pretty much. Overall, this game, Abram Smith really didn't have an incredible game, One thing to note, he had a lot of carries, but he basically averaged like 2 yards a carry in it. So still questionable. And I was arguing to put that as biggest weakness, but like I said before, running game is the overall weakness. And so is a bit targeted, sure. Biggest weakness, Jordan Ta'amu. Look, people defending Ta'amu really don't understand why this team is winning. This team is not winning because of Ta'amu. They're winning because of the defense and Matt McCrane. Look, Ta'amu leads the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns. So the touchdown's the big asterisk. Okay? Manny Wilkins and Bryce Perkins have ran multiple touchdowns in. If they were throwing touchdowns, it'd be a different story. Overall, through 3 weeks, he is 8th in completion percentage, which, again, there's only 8 qualified passers for, like, those kind of stats, so he's last in completion percentage. He's 6th in yards per pass. He's tied 2nd in interceptions. The one thing I'll give him credit for is he's not taking sacks. But to counterpoint, this is a really solid offensive line through the first 3 weeks of the season. So he shouldn't really be taking a lot of sacks. He's been really weak. Like, they look at his one deep, and it was a great pass. I said it on Twitter. It was a great pass. His one great pass to Ty Scott and be like, man, that's why he's the best quarterback in the league. And it's like, dude, no. Look, people talk about who's his backup, who would you replace him with? That's the issue with DC. Basically, since midway through last season, Ta'amu's got this like kind of aura of being unbenchable because of but it might be a downgrade. It might be a downgrade, but you already have a weaker quarterback. Like, how bad can your backups be to the point where you're not going to put them on the field? If you're not bringing them onto the field, why the hell did you get them anyway? Because, again, they're winning, and it kind of feels like that this might be the worst case scenario in a lot of ways, is them winning. Because if Ta'amu's playing like this and they're 1-2, he's getting benched. But because they're 3-0, they're going to keep playing him there. But again, he's still throwing interceptions. Look, there's been a lot of drop passes by his receivers. There's also been a lot of dropped interceptions in this game. So you can't really look at one without saying the other. Because again, if you include everything, he probably has another 2 touchdowns and another 2 interceptions. Right? That's just the bottom line. If all of the dropped passes were caught, he's got more touchdowns, more yards, and he's got more interceptions and probably another pick six on his resume. Ta'amu has not been a great quarterback this season. He has not been in this level aside from 1 year where he had an essential spring football god squad around him. It took having 2 elite receivers, the best running back in the league, and a great offensive line to put up a great season. Aside from that, he's been a turnover machine, and this year, it's not even just the turnovers. It's his inaccuracy. It's a big reason why they're kicking so many field goals. Like, you'll see people defend Ta'amu and say that if you say he's bad, you don't know ball knowledge. No, it's the opposite. They're winning games in spite of Ta'amu because he'll get you to somewhat field goal range. He'll miss a couple wide open throws, and now you're forced to kick it. When you have 30 kicking points through 3 weeks, and there's been a couple of misses slash blocks, that just shows a lot of issues with your team, all things considered. That shows that you're being forced to kick field goals instead of getting touchdowns. That's not a good thing on your quarterback, especially when you have as many... Again, like I said, they have so many takeaways. If your turnover differential is the best in the league by a country mile, and you have 3 interceptions by your quarterback, that means you're taking the ball away a lot, meaning you're getting the ball usually in great field position. So getting field goals isn't insanely impressive. And even his overall stats, you can't say are insane because he's throwing the ball so many damn times. He's completing like 15 passes a game, but he's throwing like 35 a game almost. So you have another asterisk there. Again, it's like Kyle Sloter back in 2022, if I remember correctly, and Ta'amu for that matter. Yes, if you're throwing the ball a ton and you're starting every game, you're going to be up there in stats like yards and touchdowns. It's why the overall consensus has drifted away from yards and touchdowns in some aspects and more so to completion percentage and passer rating. Because you can rack up and force feed passing yards. That's what's happened this season. Ta'amu hasn't been Perez last year. What made Perez's season last year so good as a passer was that he not only had the cumulative stats like yards, like touchdowns, but he had the stats like accuracy and yards per pass. That's what made his season so damn great. Ta'amu through 3 weeks, again, let me know what I say. When I say current starter, that's not counting the walking train wreck that has been Anthony Brown this season. So, not counting him, starting quarterbacks right now, there's an argument that he's the weakest. I said an argument because some would argue Mondes. Hell, some would even argue Corral has been this season. But there's an argument for that. Well, also EJ Perry if he is the starter, because again, like, he gives you a couple great drives, but man, the rest of the time it's rough. Again, it's even like when he was at the Panthers, right? That Week 10 game, he gave us that great drive when we needed it. He gave us a couple great drives in the second half, and that's pretty much it. But again, Te'amu has not been a great quarterback. He's not, for how much Perez has not been playing as well as he was last year, Perez is still better. Perkins is better. Manny Wilkins, even with this awful game, so far has been better. But like I said, we're on fraud watch with him and the team because of who they've played. But Te'amu, yes, they played a tough schedule, but against other teams, like when you look at how he played against these teams, look at how other quarterbacks played against them, those other quarterbacks usually played him better. So, biggest weakness is Te'amu. I know this is a bit of a long rant here, but it's really aggravating seeing how many people defend him because of one great season in 2023 where he had an insane squad around him. When every other year, no matter who's been around you, you haven't played well, that doesn't bode well for you. Again, 2022, league leader in interceptions. 2024, the UFL, league leader in interceptions. Right now, one away from the league leader right now, and now he's not even accurate. So to me, that's their biggest weakness. Again, their ground game has been disappointing. Abram Smith, I hope he gets it together. I've seen flashes. I've seen some flashes, but overall, he still is not the same Abram Smith he was. But Te'amu, man, I want to see somebody else play quarterback for this team, at least as a legit starter. Not no McClendon coming in because of an injury having to play after practicing with backups and all that. I mean, somebody be announced early on in the week as the starter and get a chance to start. Because then we can really see, is it Te'amu? Is it the system? Or is it the quarterback or what it is? But as of now, through 3 weeks, the biggest weakness is the quarterback. A better quarterback like Perez, like Perkins, hell, even a mediocre quarterback like a Danny Etling, this team might be better. Because at least with Etling, he's just going to put up the most mid stats ever, but it might still be better than the issues. Because again, Te'amu is a very hot and cold guy. He'll give you a big throw, and then everything else will be bad. But again, with Perkins, with Luis Perez, with a lot of backups, arguably, this team could be better. It's just they refuse to try anything else that's different. And so it's given this aura of an unbenchable quarterback, when at this point, the only unbenchable quarterback really should be Luis Perez. That's what I'll say. End of that, I guess we'll call it a very mini rant. So that'll do it. This has been Zom Fox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos. Let me know down below what your power rankings are, and do you agree with all my biggest weaknesses? Again, like I said, I think the 2 to 5 spot is the one that's really tough to call. Even the 6 to 8 spot, I could still see an argument for Houston being the weakest team in the league and just saying, it was a pick 6 that got him a win. So let me know down below what you guys think. At least at the time of recording this video, I have a couple plans to show up on a couple of other shows this week, so I'll watch out for the community post tab, as if I end up being on them, I will post to that tab about them. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, guys, have a great night.